Hello, and welcome to the Time Machine with Trish and Mike. Obviously, as you can tell by now, this episode will start a little bit different from our normal format. We will get to all the fun and interesting historical stuff that you've come to expect from our show in a moment, but we must first begin by addressing the events that occurred this past week here in the United States. As we sit here and record this episode, it's Saturday afternoon, January 9th. A lot has happened over the last 3 days, and we obviously have no idea what will happen from the time we record this to the time that you listen to this. When Trish and I started this show, there were things we agreed from the beginning, and one of those things is we did not want to get into politics, and we still aren't. But since this is a history-based podcast, it would be wrong to not comment on what has been a major historical event. This past year has been probably the most challenging year that we as a country have faced. If there's one thing we've learned from all of this, it's that words matter. One of the best things about social media is that you get to meet so many wonderful people. Trish and I would not be here doing this show together, and we would not have met if it weren't for Instagram. Unfortunately, with social media, it leads to a lot of negativity and a rapid decline in our civility as a society. 24/7 media has sadly lended itself to being a shouting contest over who can yell and whine the loudest. Our politicians act like children and set poor examples when they should be demonstrating leadership. Until we as a society take a step back and have actual conversations, we will never move forward and become a better society. We live in a country where both political parties have valid ideas, but refuse to listen to one another and find a compromise. Far too many politicians are more interested in themselves and getting reelected than they are about making actual difference in their constituents' lives. We're not getting into a deep discussion today about what needs to change. Those discussions are for another time in another forum. People have legitimate concerns, and as we've seen this year, people don't feel that their concerns have been being heard. And unfortunately, violence and rioting have been the answer. Until the other side understands why the other side is upset, we simply will not grow as a society. The only thing that we all can do individually is to just make a genuine, honest effort every day to be a better person, to listen and to learn. Trish, you're a teacher, you're a mom, you're a Canadian. One of the fun parts of this show is the U.S. Canadian dynamic.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts from the past week?
Well, I think you hit it absolutely on the head there, Mike, when we talk about the lack of civility, the lack of willingness to just communicate in an appropriate way, right? Um, I'm going through as a mom, when my kids start yelling at one another, I sit them down and say, hey, you know, that's rude, that hurts feelings, that doesn't accomplish anything, that pushes people away. Right. And that's me as a mom. I'm a leader in my house, and that's what I have to do. And I feel that there are a lot of leaders, and it's not just the United States. Absolutely, it's not, right? There's countries all over the world that have this similar problem where leaders aren't willing to take the step to be calm, to communicate clearly, and to recognize that although they have a perspective, the other side has valid points to their perspective as well,
Exactly.
right? Both sides are there's things going on where they need to sit down, communicate, and say, look, what needs to be changing here? Because if you're not changing, you're not growing for the better, then it's just going to be a rapid decline, right?
I totally agree. And I think that's what we've seen over, especially over this last year. We have
Hmm.
seen that just decline, the lack of discussion and communication, and the increase in the anger and the violence. I recently was reminded of a quote that former First Lady Barbara Bush, President Bush's Bush 41's wife, had said something about to make a marriage work, you both have to be willing to go 75%. Don't
Hmm.
just meet in the middle. Go beyond that. And I think that's kind of what we as a society need to do.
Hmm.
We have to. It's not just let's find a way to compromise, which we need to do, but we also need to find ways to go beyond that. And
Hmm.
until we, as a country and individually start thinking that way, it's going to be a hard road ahead. But hopefully, better days are here. And I'm not singling out particular individuals, because both parties here in America, it's primarily a two-party system, Republicans and Democrats, and there are people on both sides. And if you're thinking that there's not, then respectfully, you need to reevaluate some things, because there are,
Well,
you
and
know,
things aren't just black and white. That's far too simplistic for the very complex, world we live in.
exactly.
Yeah.
There are more than two sides to everything.
hmm
So, um,
So I,
w-
I will say, watching it on the news from a Canadian's perspective, um, it it brought back kind of a lot of feelings, actually, from different events in history where you're seeing this neighbor, this country that you care about, and your heart's just breaking, because and that's not to say that Canadians are perfect either, by any means. That's not what I'm saying at all. But you the American dream, the American
yeah.
idea
hmm
is so much bigger than just America itself, that it was just heartbreaking, and you're just worried in general. And I think a lot of what's happening is definitely because there's fear, there's concern, there's with COVID, with the economy, with everything.
Yeah.
People are they're reacting without being proactive about why.
Agreed. And until we get to the bottom of the whys and the
hmm
hows,
Yeah.
that's where the problem lies. I mean, neither you nor I have a magic wand that's going to sit here and fix what's already happened. The only thing that
Yeah.
you and I can do is hope for a better tomorrow, and
hmm
that's just what we as a society have to do. And it
Yeah.
takes everybody, because we're all in this together, literally. I
Yeah.
mean, you know. Go ahead.
Well, and I think more people need to be. I mean, we started this podcast with the idea of, like, let's look at historical events from these two different perspectives. And even though we're neighbors and we will probably have similar ideas or understandings of these events, it's taking the time to sit down, discussing it, and finding those differences that you and I have both found that we've enjoyed, right? And not a lot of people
Yeah.
are doing that. They're not sitting down to look at the same incidents, the same event, the same problem, right? And looking at it
Right.
from the different perspectives and just talking about it.
No, I totally agree. And that's just what we're gonna have to start doing.
Mhm.
Um, anything else you have that you want to add to this, or
No,
no?
I think we covered quite a bit,
I
right?
I think so. All right.
Things that we can
N-
take from it.
no, normally I would have some sort of witty transition between topics, and there's really not one that I can use here. So
Mm.
we're just gonna jump into this week's top historical fun factoid thingy.
We're going to go back to our regular scheduled broadcast.
Yes. So if you have just been skipping ahead because you didn't want to listen to what we say, now's the time to begin listening, because the show will get back to normal at this point.
Back to your
Um,
bar trivia Jeopardy winning knowledge.
yes, that is the original intent of this show, or one of the original intents, and we're going to get back
Mhm.
to that. And it's okay, it's cheesy, but there is sort of a transition I could actually use, because back in I think it's the '60s, Coca-Cola had a song, "I'd like to buy the world a Coke so we could sing in perfect harmony," or something to that effect.
Mhm.
I'd like to buy everyone listening to the show a Coke. Now, obviously, I can't, but know that I would, because our first item today is on January 15th, 1889, Coca-Cola was incorporated and became an official company.
And we all benefit from that delicious drink.
Yes, we do. But yeah, before I get into this, you've been to America a few times.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, is there a difference between Canadian Coke and American Coke?
See, I'm probably a poor one to ask.
Yeah.
The only thing
Okay.
I do, only because people always ask, "Are you a Coke or Pepsi person?" And I honestly, I'm like, it's soda. And
hmm
I know we call it pop in Canada. My ex-husband lived in America for a while and got in the habit of calling it soda, and so we got in the habit of in our family calling it soda. So when people ask me, I don't really tell the difference between the different sodas, but I do really miss the flavors. We don't get all of the flavors that you guys get down in the United States.
Right. So like you're just getting like maybe Coke, Diet Coke, Sprite. Probably you're not
Yeah.
getting the handful of variants that they have, like cherry Coke.
Well, like vanilla
Mhm.
Coke. Man, yes, we don't. Sometimes you can get cherry Coke seems more common than the vanilla Coke, and I can get the vanilla Coke at specialty stores,
Okay.
but it's quite expensive.
Yeah, like cherry Coke was one of the more like that flavor's been around for a long time. Vanilla Coke was more of
Mhm.
something that came along. I want to say maybe the last 20 years or so. And then like I know like with their Diet Coke brands, they have a lot of flavored versions. There's like
Oh,
cherry Diet
really?
Coke, vanilla Diet Coke, orange Diet Coke, and then of course we can get into these
What?
the Coca-Cola. Do they have the Coca-Cola freestyle machines in Canada?
Not that I'm aware of. It might be in other parts of Canada, maybe just not in Alberta.
Maybe not in Alberta. Okay, so basically, this they have here in America. A lot of places have these Coca-Cola freestyle machines. Just you'll see them at like a Burger King or other fast food or food court type places or
Mhm.
gas stations may have them. So it has a touch screen,
Okay.
and you pick the drink you want: Coke, Diet Coke, Sprite, ginger ale, whatever, and then you can pick a flavor to add to it. So you can literally make
What?
like
No, we definitely do not have this.
so like
Now
you
I'm so
literally
jealous. I need to find one when I go back to visit you.
yes. I will whenever you come to America next, I will make it a point to like find one on a map to where you will be and be like, "Hey,
Okay.
you need to go here." So even if you don't come to Florida, if you go to California or wherever you go, I'll be like, "Hey, go to this place. They have them." And then of
All
course, you know
right.
it's going to be broken when you get there, but you know.
And then I'll cry. I'll share a selfie weeping.
Yes. So you can literally make like hundreds of combinations of drinks from
Not
these
cool.
machines. Yeah. Anyway, so that's how Coca-Cola is now. But back in the day, when it began as a so John Pemberton, he was injured in the Civil War and became addicted to morphine.
Okay.
And so as he began to experiment with painkillers and stuff, he created different concoctions and he winds up creating Coca-Cola. And he eventually winds up his he was going to give the rights and everything to his son because he got stomach cancer. And so what his son rather decided that he wanted to do was sell the company off and make the quick cash on it
Right.
instead of more of a longer term thing because Pemberton had a feeling that eventually that this drink was going to catch on and become popular.
Mhm.
So in 1888, just before Pemberton died, he and his son sold the patent to an Atlanta pharmacist named Asa Griggs Candler. He sold it for 1,750 US dollars.
And so they don't get any like the family no longer gets any royalties from that. They just outright sold it.
As best I can tell,
Oh my
yes.
goodness. Oh my
So
goodness. It's one of those awful business deals.
in modern equivalent, that would be like selling this formula for 47,230 US dollars,
Like nothing.
which is still I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd like to have $47,230,
Well,
but
right.
in a business sense, that is nothing
Oh,
that,
that
you
makes my
know.
heart hurt for them. Okay.
So the whole business model of Coca-Cola at the time was based on selling them at soda fountains because you'd go to your local drugstore or your restaurant or whatever, and
Mhm.
they'd make the soda. They'd get the syrup. They'd mix. They add the carbonation to it. It was a person that did that versus nowadays you push your glass against the machine and everything comes out blended together.
Right.
The internal mixing is done inside the machine now versus a person doing it and having to get the right ratios. Some entrepreneurs from Tennessee wind up approaching Candler and they want to begin bottling his product. So they buy the bottling rights for $1.
He sold it for $1?
He didn't sell it, he just sold the rights for them to bottle it for a
Okay.
dollar. So they're still having to go through Candler to get the syrup
Ah,
to make the drink with. So they're still buying the product from him, but the rights to
okay.
sell or to bottle it, he sold for $1. So what Coca-Cola does is they don't actually make the drinks that you see in the store. All that's done at more of a local level through local bottlers. Over time, the number of bottlers expanded. There are thousands of them around the world. Coca-Cola makes two products. They make syrup that is sold to restaurants, gas stations, etc. And then they make a syrup concentrate that is sold to the bottlers, who then make your Cokes in your bottles, your cans, that sort of thing.
Okay.
At the time, most fountain drinks back in the early 1900s, in that time period, sold for about 7 or 8 cents for a 6.7 ounce glass. Now, I know in Canada you use the metric system, so I'm guessing a can of Coke is sold as 350 milliliters or
Right.
something
Yeah.
like that, roughly.
Mhm.
And on American cans, it has ounces and the milliliters on it.
Interesting. They do?
Yeah.
That's so funny.
So a 6.7 ounce would be about roughly half that size.
Hmm.
So Coke marketed themselves for 5 cents. And due to the original bottling contracts, Coke was locked into a fixed price that they sold the syrup for.
Okay.
So the only way they could increase profits was by selling more product.
So how long were they then locked into this 5 cent price range?
They were locked into it actually for a while because one of the other reasons was vending machines.
Okay.
Because up through the 50s, there were about 460,000 vending machines in the United States, and Coca-Cola owned about 85% of them.
Oh, wow.
And they were all set up to accept nickels, which is what we call a 5 cent piece. So
Yeah.
they were selling for 5 cents. You just drop the nickel in and you'd get a Coke. What happened was Coke wanted to increase profits, but the machines weren't capable of giving change or accepting extra, different sized coins, and they didn't want to increase the price to 10 cents because they felt that was going to be too big of a jump. So to increase profits, one thing Coca-Cola did was they actually went to the US Treasury Department in the mid 50s and they said, "Hey, we've got a great idea. Why don't you create a 7.5 cent coin
Just for us, because we're special.
just just for us? But you can use it and you can adapt it and it can go to other things." And the Treasury Department was like, "No,
Yeah.
we're not going to do that."
But clearly keep it the same size as a nickel, so it totally works for our vending machines.
Exactly. And so another way Coke actually tried to increase their profits, this is going to make people angry when they learn this. What they wanted to do to these vending machines was to make every ninth bottle an empty bottle.
What?
Yes.
So you would pay for a perfectly good bottle of Coke and end up with an empty one?
Yep. So like 8 people in a row would walk up and get a bottle of Coke. The ninth person would walk up and get an empty bottle. So then, well, now you have to buy another bottle to get a Coke.
That's a terrible
So
lottery.
it's a terrible, right? And so it would effectively raise the price to like 5.6 cents because of you'd wind up making that extra,
Right. What
for someone buying an empty bottle. Never mind that you have a really angry customer at this point. Thankfully, that plan did not wind up going through. And as technology evolved, eventually vending machines were able to generate change. And
Right.
obviously, we don't pay 5 cents for Coca-Cola anymore.
A lot of people would probably consider Coca-Cola the king of the soda market, which leads into our other story. Another king, we're looking at King Edward the VIII, who on January 20th, 1936, succeeds his father, the British King George V. And a year later, he's actually going to become the first willing monarch to abdicate the throne. And he does this in order to marry his dun, 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 American divorcee wife, Wallace Simpson. Ooh,
Ooh,
scandalous, right?
scandalous.
Now, Mike, I have a question for you.
Yes, I have an answer for you.
Do you know
Hopefully.
the actual last name of the royal British family?
That's a really good question because they're always referred to as their first name. You have
Right,
Queen Elizabeth, you have Prince Harry.
right. We don't use last names.
Right, because I mean, like you had Diana Spencer, but she wasn't a royal until she married into the family,
Mm-hmm.
Princess Diana. No, I gotta be honest. I don't. I don't know the last name.
What is interesting is the royal family actually goes by the last name Windsor. So, for example, when Prince William or Prince Harry were in the military, they were known as their rank
Okay.
and then Windsor.
So like Sergeant Windsor or whatever
Yes, yeah.
they would have been. Okay.
But this name isn't actually very old for the royal family. Before World War I, their actual surname was Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, demonstrating their strong ties to their German ancestry. Fun fact, right? We get this tie into the German royal family. We get Christmas trees, or Christmas trees became popular because of a German tradition that was brought over by Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert of Germany, in 1841. So that's where the British lineage kind of meshes with the German lineage. And
Interesting.
what's interesting about King Edward the VIII is his whole career. So already the abdication was a really big deal, and the fact that he wanted to marry this American divorcee. What is also interesting about this abdication for King Edward the VIII is, not only was he trying to marry an American, but as a divorcee, the King of England, or the Queen of England, is the head of the Anglican Church. And at this point in time, they didn't believe in divorce. So it was a huge scandal. And basically, they just would not let him marry her unless he decided to give up the throne. That in of itself is a great story. But then the rest of his life is kind of marred in these ties, scandalous ties to Germany and Nazism, which you don't expect from the
Oh,
royal family.
that kind of goes against everything from World War II that we know.
Right? You would think, King Edward, who's actually born Edward Albert Christian George Andrew Patrick David, known
Say that 3 times fast.
known to the world as Prince Edward. He was actually called David by his close friends and his family, and his wife would actually use the name David. So this Edward never really kind of stuck around. He met Wallis Simpson in 1931 through her friend, Thelma Furness, who was actually dating the prince at the time. So she was an American and a divorcee, right? These two factors that the British people abhorred. And that was a big no-no. So he did abdicate. But you would think they would just go off and live their lives, happy, content, having abdicated the throne, right?
No, that's too easy.
That's too easy. That would be too nice of a story. So Wallis actually had ties to German spies that I guess she had.
Ooh.
It's not really known if these were, just friendships or something more, but there was ties. And David himself, former King Edward the VIII, he was actually very close to his German relatives and actually supported them, in terms as the war was gearing up. He actually had vocal support for them. So the prime minister at the time, Churchill, steps in. He actually has the British Secret Service, right, MI5, involved in monitoring the new king. So this was before the abdication. He was already kind of showing support for Germany. So he has MI5 start following him. They would have already been doing this anyway, naturally, making sure the leader
Right.
of the country is safe. But they start really looking closely at these ties to Germany. And we have documents that by 1940, the German government, right, Hitler is installed as chancellor, I believe, in 36, 38. Oh, no, earlier than that. Sorry, he's installed as chancellor in 33. So Hitler decides this is a great idea for him to get the former British king on his side, and that maybe there was talks that King Edward and his wife Wallis would become the monarch of Britain, or of Germany, and then when they took over Britain, he would be able to be the king of both.
Looking at it from that point of view, that seems logical.
Right?
If you've got him on your side, he could use his powers to be in charge of
It's
England as
kind
well.
of a
Yeah,
good
that's
deal.
yeah.
Yeah,
If it
if it
works,
works.
which spoiler alert.
It didn't. But the former king and his wife were actually, according to documents, were kind of playing both sides. They never really agreed to Germany's plan, but they didn't really divulge all of the information to the British government either. They were kind of like, oh, let's just kind of wait and see. The FBI, there's an American connection, not only just because Wallace is American, But they would go to America to visit and travel, and the American FBI actually gets involved in following them at the outbreak of World War II, and they're kind of concerned about them. There's hundreds of pages written to President Roosevelt at the time regarding the former king's strong support of Germany. So your president is made aware of these things, and they're very concerned that this is actually a real possibility.
Yeah, I would be too if I was the president of the United States and I find out that Germany's trying to use these back channels to wind up taking over England as well, who is an ally of
Yeah.
mine in the fight against Germany. And yeah,
Well, and I know Roosevelt worked so hard to kind of keep the peace for so long, right?
right. Because we didn't get involved in World War II, at least,
No.
on any sort of large scale until we were brought into
Yeah.
it when Pearl Harbor happened.
Yeah, so he was and he was so desperate to just keep the peace, make things work as much as he could without getting kind of involved, and then but still wanting to protect. We actually have Churchill. Winston Churchill gets so concerned that he basically sends the former king and his wife to the Bahamas to become ambassadors. So he officially becomes the governor in the Bahamas, and Churchill kind of shoos these rumors away, and he says that nothing's legitimate. Papers leaked in 1957 kind of prove a different story. And this rumor or these allegations are going to dog the former king for the rest of his life until he passes.
Did he ever come back from the Bahamas? Do we know, or did he just wind up staying there?
So they did stay there for a time.
Mhm.
You'd like to think, hey, lovebirds, you've been given a great opportunity to be governor of this, beautiful location, sun, heat, right? I'm
N-
assuming nice
n-
drinks on the beach,
Yeah, no cold England winters to live through.
right? But there's always a
Oh
but.
boy. There's always a but.
They get invited to go and visit Germany in
Of
1947.
course. Of course they do.
Right? Which, I mean, in 1940, it was slightly different. Yeah, Hitler had invaded Poland. It wasn't quite the same, right? The Americans aren't involved. Or no, when did you guys get involved? Pearl Harbor was 39, December
December 7th, 1941.
41. Oh, so I'm way off on my
Yep.
dates there, right? So,
A couple of years. It's okay.
I should be better at that.
If they bombed Prince Edward Island, you would know the date better, probably.
That's true.
Of course, it would be a lot harder for them to do that because that's on the East Coast, which gets into why Hawaii was the target.
Target for Japan. So we're in the tail end of the war, and the couple's going to go and travel to Germany. It doesn't sound like the most politically correct or publicity-wise wise event to do. So they're basically shunned by both British and American social circles at this point in time. And you think they should just stay in the Bahamas and be cool and calm, but no, they go to Germany and they're actually met by massive cheering crowds. So the German people were super supportive of this couple. And do you want to know what he had to say about Hitler?
What did he have to say about Hitler?
It's like, what do you think? What do we? You're thinking he would probably say something a little, politically correct, speaking of the times.
Yeah, but I have a feeling that's probably not what came out of his mouth.
No, in private, in his private circles, in his memoirs, he claims that Hitler was, quote, not such a bad chap. And he would frequently in his memoirs bring up other groups of people, the British government, the Americans and American government, and even the Jewish people themselves as reasons for the actual cause of the war. So he doesn't blame Hitler or Germany or the Nazi Party whatsoever in terms of the start of World War II. Now, after when things kind of turned, when those 1957 documents are leaked, he would come out and be quoted as saying that Hitler was a somewhat ridiculous figure with his theatrical posturings and his bombastic pretensions.
Well, at least he finally came around to acknowledging that.
Yeah,
Little
yeah.
late, but
Little late. Now, about that house in the Bahamas, it actually recently, as of last year, went up for sale. It's a gorgeous home if you Google it.
Oh,
Looks amazing. I would never have left it if I had been given the opportunity to go live there.
is it still for sale?
It's still for sale. As far as my research, I did not find that anyone has purchased it yet.
Okay.
It might have to do with the price tag. Do you want to know how much they're selling it for?
Well, I just got my stimulus check here in America, so I got a few extra $100 I could spend.
I think
How much is it gonna set me back?
you might need a few more stimulus checks. But in
Okay.
February 2020, which
Yeah.
is the last date I could find, it
Sure.
is up for a cool $8.5 million.
Oh, yeah. I just need like
Let's just get a couple of friends together. We'll just
yeah.
pool our resources.
Mm-hmm.
We'll
That
all go just live down in the Bahamas and live a life of luxury and sunshine and carefree.
I'm for it. Let's do that. Let's get some people together, put all our stimulus checks together, and let's go buy this 8.3, 8.9,
8.5.
8.5. Hey, I was
Yeah.
dancing all around
I
it, and you
mean,
were right in the middle.
if it's been on the market for a year already, we
Yeah.
might be able to, lower that number. We could offer
Sure.
them counter.
Knock a little bit off the top, maybe drop it down to 8 million. That's doable. Totally doable. Let's go to that house in the Bahamas and we can all live there. And I know the perfect person to get us there.
You do?
I do. Captain Charles Sully Sullenberger.
Yes.
Because on January 15th, 2009, he was the pilot of U.S. Airways Flight 1549 from LaGuardia to Seattle with a stopover in Charlotte when the plane struck a flock of Canadian geese.
I'm going to apologize already. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine because apologies is what you Canadians are so nice about doing. Um, I'm sorry. They struck a flock of Canadian geese 2 minutes and 15 seconds into the flight, losing all engine power.
On behalf of Canada, I'm going to apologize for that.
Thank you. It's very, very kind of you. Thankfully, this story has a very happy ending, and it
Mm.
could have become obviously a huge disaster. Everybody on board survived. There were some injuries, of course, but thankfully nobody died from this. So Sully was. Here's what's interesting. So the flight has two pilots. You got Sullenberger and Jeffrey Skiles was the other pilot. And so Skiles was actually the one flying the plane at the time of the strike. Sully was the pilot in command for the flight. Skiles only had 37 hours flying the Airbus A320 aircraft.
Which is not a lot of time.
Not a lot of time. In fact, this was actually his first flight assignment as pilot flying that plane. He'd previously flown in them, kind of as the secondary pilot
Right.
to the pilot in command. And so immediately after the strike, Sully takes over while Skiles begins trying to restart the engines because they don't know what's happened at this point. They just know all of a sudden our engines are not working. This is a serious problem. And the air traffic control was like, hey, can you make it back to LaGuardia? They're like, no, we can't. They asked about if maybe they could go to a Teterboro airport in New Jersey, which was nearby. And he was like, no, we're not going to make it. We're going to have to go down in the Hudson. So they land in the Hudson and they begin exiting, and people are standing out on the wings. People are standing out on the inflatable rafts that, the emergency exits that deploy. And all the passengers received $5,000 for lost luggage, an apology letter, and very importantly, they all received a refund for their flights.
Which is much better than, just what is it, like a rebate that you have to use to fly again? It'd be
Right,
like, I don't know when I'm going to fly next after something like that.
right, like you actually get a refund. You didn't just get a credit on your account or something like that. Yeah.
Man, I remember watching all that on the news with the inflatable rafts and seeing it. It was wild.
In preparation for this, I watched it all happen because there were security cameras and stuff that got it on
Mhm.
film. And it's crazy the fact that from the time the plane goes down in the water and lands, there are boats there literally within like 3 or 4 minutes. They first sent some of the ferries in New York over the Hudson. They've got the ferries to
Mhm.
take you from New York to New Jersey. And so they had a couple of them in the water. Obviously, already they were just going about their normal day. So they were able to get out there and start rescuing people, and the Coast Guard was able to come in. I mean, they had a little bit of time because they knew, hey, we've got a problem. We're going to have to go down the Hudson. But, I mean, we're talking not a lot of time to coordinate a massive rescue effort. So the fact that they got everybody out safely was just, I mean, it's a miracle on the Hudson for a reason because this
Well, and think
thing,
how smooth that landing would have to be, right? That no one really got that injured or.
because of the way some of the autopilot and stuff, without getting into a too deep discussion
Mhm.
on it, there were things that were computer controlled that Sully said later on, if he could have overridden, he would have been able to have made it an even smoother landing than it was.
Wow.
Which is interesting. It was
Mhm.
described by those on board as a hard landing. Obviously, some aircraft are actually designed with the possibility of a water landing, and the Airbus aircraft are designed with a ditching button.
Oh,
Because
really?
that's what it's called when you do a water landing. You're ditching the plane in the water, and so if they know they're going to do that, they press this button, and it actually closes some valves and openings under the aircraft to help prevent water from flooding the plane.
Wow, now that is a smart invention to add.
As part of the investigation, the NTSB determined they did several flight simulations to see if he could have made it back to LaGuardia or if he could have
Mhm.
landed at Teterboro Airport. And only 7 of 13 resulted in a successful return to LaGuardia, and only 50% of the simulations were able to successfully make it to Teterboro.
Wow, so he really just did with his gut and he just made the right
And he
decision.
made the right call. And they later determined that these were unrealistic simply because you're doing these simulations under known conditions. You're not
Right.
a pilot in a plane who's just had his engines go and you're having to process this. This is doing it knowing, hey, these are the facts. Can you make this happen?
Mhm.
Which, when you're in that scenario, you don't have. Landing
Well,
in the
and
Hudson was the right call.
when you say that they use it or these simulations under anticipated conditions, I don't think anyone can anticipate what a flock of Canadian geese is going to do to your engines because Canadians can't really anticipate what Canadian geese are going to do ever. They are the scariest creature known to a Canadian.
So South Park was right. Blame Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. You can blame us on that one. Those Canadian geese, they are awful.
That does not sound good. Yeah.
No, you do not know fear until a Canadian goose has hissed at you
Ooh.
and charged.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, so much fun. You get your cardio in.
I can imagine. So one good thing though about the rescue and getting everybody off, there were no pets on the flight. So no animals were other than the geese, obviously,
Right. Yeah.
um, which that did not go well. No other animals were harmed in this incident. Sully would go on to retire in 2010, and his final flight was from Fort Lauderdale to Charlotte, where he was actually reunited with pilot Skiles and some of the passengers that were on the original 1549 flight.
Oh, I love that.
Skiles is currently a pilot for American Airlines and flies Boeing 787 Dreamliners.
Ooh, well, that sounds
Yes.
nice.
Yeah, those are big planes.
Those are big ones.
Those are big. Speaking of big, I think you have a story about a big.
I got a big mystery about a big creature. Yeah.
Tell us about it, Trish. What you got?
So we have Nessie, right? The
Loch Ness
famous
Monster.
monster,
Yes.
yes, of Loch Ness. So Loch Ness, the largest lake by volume in the British Isles. It's located about 30 minutes southwest of the major city of Inverness in Scotland. It is 37 kilometers or 23 miles long, 230 meters or 755 feet at its deepest. So that's why it's known as the largest based on just volume.
Okay.
In April 1933, a road adjacent to Loch Ness was completed, and this allowed drivers an unobstructed view of the lake. And a couple taking a drive around the lake claims to see a creature similar to a dragon or a dinosaur, 20 feet or 6 meters long, crossing the road in front of them. And the creature was, of course, reported to local authorities. And this sparks like Nessie madness, where everyone is flocking to the lake to find out about this mythical creature, and it becomes known around the world as Nessie. Now, 1934 was a huge year for Nessie as more and more reports trickle in over the years. And eventually the news is going to make its way across the pond. And we're talking about the January 14th date, 1934, where word from Scotland about the creature is reported in the New York Times. And the Secretary of State for Scotland is quoted as saying the country had forbidden the capture or killing of the creature, which still stands. So, should Nessie be real, and should there be someone that's able to actually confirm it's an actual creature, they're not allowed to capture or kill it.
Can they swim into the lake and take a selfie with it?
Well, in 2021, that's just going to be a thing,
Of course it is.
right? I mean, I would if I was going to try and get that right angle.
I don't know. I don't know to go swimming and try to get a close up, but maybe from the shore
From
because
the shore.
this thing's that big, and he may not be photogenic, as is
Right.
evident
So,
by the fact that we have a hard time getting a picture of him
yeah,
or her.
he or she is very shy. Now, is 1933 really kind of the start of Nessie's story? What do you think?
I'm gonna say probably not because alcohol's been a thing for a lot longer than that, so there's probably sightings before then.
Yes, and this area of Scotland is known for having the strongest Scotch. Sorry, right? It's known as whiskey outside of Scotland, but in Scotland, it is a true Scotch when it's made with the materials and the water from Scotland.
Kinda like how champagne it can only be
Right.
champagne if it's from the particular region in France.
Yes,
Otherwise, it's
same
just
idea. So reports actually go back thousands of years to the indigenous peoples of Scotland, which are known as the Picts. And carvings made by the Picts show a mysterious creature with flippers. Now, our first written account of Nessie is actually made by a man named Saint Columba from the Catholic Church in 565 CE. So he's originally a missionary from Ireland, and according to his account of the incident, a man is about to be devoured by this lake creature when he comes upon it. And St. Columba orders the monster back, and it obeys. And then over the centuries, occasionally a story would pop up here and there, but not until like this 1933-34. That's when we get a whole bunch of reports all at one time. Now, over the years, there have been many famous photos and movies taken of Nessie. These have all been debunked as fakes. And one man, a big game hunter by the name of Marmaduke Wetherall, that's a fancy name.
that is.
He even went to the extreme act of making fake footprints. So, do you know how he would devise these footprints, Mike?
I am guessing it's going to involve getting something large and finding some sort of way to imprint them into the ground,
Yes. So, just like we hear stories of modern day fakes of footprints with like Bigfoot,
right?
similar idea. He basically makes a giant stamp by attaching a hippopotamus leg. And they're not quite sure if it was to an umbrella stand or one of those. Do you remember those old school wooden ashtrays that
Mhm.
would be like on a stand that were big? Yeah.
Yeah.
So he attaches a hippopotamus leg to the stand or this ashtray and then walked around the lake making the prints in the soft soil. It's like, first of all, I want to know where he even got. I know he's a big game hunter, but it's like, really, no one's going to just notice you have a hippopotamus leg in your
Well,
luggage.
that was my question. I mean, lucky rabbit's foot. I mean, how lucky is a hippopotamus leg? Is that a new thing? Do I need to
That's got to
start?
be mega lucky.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's what we need.
What is Nessie then? There's all kinds of stories. Many speculate that Nessie is a solitary survivor of the long extinct plesiosaur. The aquatic plesiosaurs were thought to have died off with the rest of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Loch Ness froze solid during recent ice ages. So this creature would have had to make its way up the River Ness, which not a lot of people realize there's a river that connects the ocean to Loch Ness. So they think if it was this solitary creature, it would have had to come up in the past 10,000 years. The plesiosaurs, though, are believed to be cold-blooded. So living in cold waters of Loch Ness does not seem reasonable. More likely, others suggest it's a archaeocite, a primitive whale with a serpentine neck that is thought to have been extinct for the last 18 million years.
Well, if Loch Ness ever gets on land and climbs a tree and he's cold-blooded and he falls out of the tree, I'm going to advise anybody not to touch him.
Not to touch him. Leave
Yeah,
him alone like the iguanas
because if
from
you just
last
think
episode.
the if you just think the iguanas get angry, ooh, I don't think Loch Ness would be too happy.
You don't want to see an angry Loch Ness. Now,
No.
skeptics, not non believers of this mythical creature, skeptics believe that what people are actually seeing are what's known as six, which are oscillations in the water surface caused by the inflow of cold river water to the slightly warmer loch. And I'm like, well, if the loch is slightly warmer than the river, how did the plateosaur even get up the river? But I'm not, a paleontologist. I didn't go that route in school. So the last major news about Nessie, when do you think the last time we heard about Nessie, Mike, was?
That was gonna be my follow-up question for you. When's the last time does Nessie have an Instagram?
Oh, I don't know. I should double check that. She should, or he should. I know they always go with the female pronoun, but that's kind of insensitive nowadays. Um, Well, I think you can all guess that the magical year of 2020 is, of
Of
course,
course.
the last time we heard about Nessie. So in September of 2020, a man by the name of Ronald Mackenzie, who runs Cruise Loch Ness, claims to have captured sonar images of the monster. And the images show a single animate object estimated to be between 15 to 20 feet long, and it was captured hovering 62 feet above the bottom of the lake. 2020, the year that keeps on giving.
Loch Ness has been a popular thing now for about 85 years, roughly.
Mhm.
We still like to me this is actually one of a legitimate interesting mystery because in 85 years we have not been able to authenticate its existence.
Yeah, no, nothing. All of the images have been determined as fakes. Either they were made out of rubber dinghies or logs, or there's lots of photoshopped images that people try to claim are legit.
Right.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one because on one hand it's easy to dismiss as going, okay, this is just some crazy tale that has been told through time.
Hmm.
On the other hand, especially with the connection that the lake is connected to the ocean, it lends a little bit of credence to that this could be a thing because
Right.
we know that the ocean is huge and we know that there are animals in the ocean that we have not identified or discovered,
We actually know more about the moon than we do about our own ocean.
which is really crazy to think about.
Right.
And so I can't say it doesn't exist, but I can't tell you that it does.
I secretly like to believe a little bit in the mystery.
Yeah,
Mystery
it
adds a little bit of spice to life, right?
it does. And this is a fun one because at least to our knowledge, Nessie's never hurt anybody.
Right.
So,
No, she just tends to get in the way of cars while they're driving, or like comes upon people unexpectedly, or actually more like the people come upon him or her unexpectedly and are a little freaked out. Well, that's not her or his fault, right?
right.
That's not Missy's fault.
Herein brings up another question that I have one day when we can discover the validity of Nessie. Is it more than one Nessie? Because, if we're talking about an animal from the mid 30s, it's 85 years. You have to assume that they're not born being 20 feet long. They have to grow to that
Right.
size. So,
There's got to be offspring or a
w-
breeding partner. Or are they like
right.
turtles?
Yeah, like they're what is the reproductive history? Because otherwise, we're talking about an animal, if seen in 2020, that existed in the mid 30s. We're talking about, and when you factor in a few years probably to grow to that size, we're talking about a creature that's 100 years old. And
Yeah.
there's not a ton of animals of any kind that live to be 100 years old. That there are
Yeah.
some, but there's not many.
No. Like, well, like I said, turtles, they can live a very long time.
Right.
Parrots, yeah, large aquatic creatures, I'm not sure. Like,
Yeah,
isn't whales only about 40 years?
I was gonna say I think it isn't a whale 40, maybe 50 on the high
Let me
end.
double check. Killer whales can live to be 29. Blue whales can go to 90. So, but
Okay.
I think you would recognize if there's a blue whale living in a lake. That's not really.
Right.
Sperm whale 70 years, humpback whale 50, beluga 50, North Pacific right whale 70,
Okay.
and short fin pilot whale 45 years, or what comes up on the quick search.
So that tells me that the Nessie from 2020 is not the same Nessie. It has to be an offspring in all likelihood.
In all likelihood.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm all about, I love the shows that try to solve the mystery, and they're like, let's go on the big boat adventure, and they have the sonar equipment, and it's just kind of fascinating.
Yeah,
If nothing else, at least we learn more about the lake and the creatures that actually live in the lake, which more knowledge is always good.
it is. And speaking of shows with offspring, that takes us to our next topic for this week. January 19th, 1953, Lucy Goes to the Hospital airs. This was the episode of I Love Lucy where Lucy gives birth to her son, little Ricky.
I love Lucy.
What's ironic is 12 hours before this episode airs, Lucille Ball actually gave birth to her son, Desi Arnaz Jr.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, this episode was watched by a lot of people. 44 million people watched this episode.
44 million. Oh my goodness. Everybody was invested in this birth.
Yes, they were. And in fact, 79.3% of all American homes watching TV that night were watching I Love Lucy.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So I'm curious now what the other 20.7% were watching, but because especially
Yeah.
back in the 50s, we only really had a few channels back in the day here in America. So yeah, it's interesting. That record, by the way, the 79.3% share of
Mhm.
the TV viewership would hold until Elvis's first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, which would get an 82.6% share, and that record still
Wow.
stands today.
No one's ever beaten that record?
For the share, correct.
Oh,
So
okay.
so so
Right.
TV ratings, at least here in America, are you basically have two numbers. You have the rating, which refers to the number of households that tuned in to watch the show based on a percentage of populations that have TVs. And then you have
Oh,
the share rating, which is a percentage based on the number of people who were actually watching TV at the time.
fascinating that they're able to figure that all out.
That gets into a whole side discussion that can be had about the Nielsen ratings and whatnot, and the
Mhm.
validity and the accuracy of them because of the sample sizing that they do. It's an interesting thing. Ultimately, I don't think we ever truly know how many people are watching something. Although I think with technology now, with cable boxes and streaming and what have you, we could get
To be
more
able to
accurate
track.
numbers.
Mhm.
But
Now,
yeah,
do Americans have, um, like, do you have to have a percentage of American content? Because in Canada, we have what's known as CanCon, where you have to have a specific percentage of your radio and your television showing Canadian-made content.
no, we have nothing like that.
Nothing like that.
No, I
That's
mean
great. Like,
we have like PBS, which is public broadcasting, that does
right.
some stuff, but there's like no
But there's no law
law.
that outlines, like, we need to have an American
Right.
cultural content.
Yeah, I mean we have regulations for
Oh,
like our local TV stations here that they have to
mhm.
show X number of hours of programming a week for educational purposes for children.
Okay.
But there's really no sort of law that says, X number of your programming has to be American produced
American.
because the vast majority of it is already.
Right. Well, and that's like the majority of Canadian television is American. And so the CRTC, which is the part of the Canadian government here that deals with regulation over broadcasting,
Mhm.
they wanted to make sure that the Canadian culture, I guess, was protected and not infringed upon by our American counterparts. So for us, like you talked about PBS, we have CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcast Channel
Mhm.
or corporation. That's where, we wanted to make sure that every Canadian could have access to a Canadian channel and the news and all that kind of stuff. But for us, our television, the CRTC requires 60% yearly of television and at least 50% of programming aired daily from 6 p.m. to midnight has to be Canadian origin. In May 2011, they changed for private television broadcasters was lower to 55% yearly. So we've had an issue in terms of Netflix where they don't feel that there's enough Canadian content on like streaming venues.
Streaming rights in Canada are different than the US. I mean, there are shows
Yeah,
that are probably on Netflix Canada that aren't on Netflix in the US,
right.
and movies and what have you. Now, I'm assuming since the CBC is a government ran channel that
Hmm.
this is something that is available to all Canadians. It's not something on a cable or satellite plan like anybody with a TV with an antenna can get this channel. Is that right?
So when we switched from it was like analog to digital
Digital. Right.
signal,
Yep.
there was if you were a Canadian that didn't have like digital access, you were just having like a television with antennas.
Mhm.
There was something provided for you to attach to your antennas, I believe,
Yeah.
so that you could still access CBC.
Yeah,
So you could have your news and your kids programs and
yeah, we
all
we
that
had
jazz.
that here when we made the transition. I think it was 2009, I believe.
Yeah, that seems about right around the same, I think, same time period.
Yeah. So, our government had a similar program that would offer converter boxes for your
Mhm.
of course, with modern TVs, you don't necessarily need these converters because 'cause they're built into the TVs. So you
Right.
don't have to necessarily have, cable programming. So it is, in a sense, still a over-the-air broadcast
Mhm.
channel. It's not you don't have to pay anything to get the CBC.
No,
Right, yeah, okay.
no.
Alright then.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that's really popular on TV is sports, and I believe there's a significant Canadian sports day in history that you learned from your CBC Canadian Minute.
There is. So, January 15th, 1892, James Naismith, the creator of basketball, publishes the official rules of basketball.
And we know that in the time since, basketball has gone on to become a hugely popular sport, at least here in America. How popular is basketball in Canada?
Oh, basketball's pretty huge.
Is it? Okay.
And Naismith's actually a very interesting Canadian because he kind of epitomizes this Canadian Americans working together, doing things together. Because although he's born November 6th, 1861, in Elmont, Ontario, he's actually going to pass away at the age of 78 in 1939 in Lawrence, Kansas. So he starts off, of course, the first half of his life in Canada.
Hmm.
He's going to eventually move to the University of Kansas in Lawrence, and he works there for 41 years and is the basketball program director at that university. So, of course, he's most famous for creating the game of basketball. He's actually the first member of the Basketball Hall of Fame in Canada, and he's also inducted into Canada's Sports Hall of Fame and the Canada Walk of Fame. Did you know what basketball was almost called? It was almost not called basketball.
Ooh, I feel like I know this, and I'm just not remembering. It's something really odd, right?
Yeah, it almost ties into your Sully story. Almost.
Okay.
Not quite a goose, but duck on a rock.
Duck on a rock.
Duck on a rock. Namesmith was always passionate about physical activity, even when he was a little kid. And when he's younger, he and his classmates came up with this game where they would gather near a large stone and a rock called the duck. I have no idea why it was called the duck, is placed on another stone, a larger stone. And one person would act as the guard. The other stood about 10 to 15 feet away and they would try to displace it by hurling rocks. And at first, they're throwing it more like a baseball
Hmm.
and they realize that this isn't really going to work. And so they move to this high lobbing in the air, which is eventually going to be the natural arc that basketball players are going to incorporate into the game. So, duck on a rock.
Duck on a rock.
We could be right. And of course, it's basketball because they used peach baskets to catch the ball.
Right, which originally did
Um,
not have a hole in the bottom.
did not have a hole in the bottom. The athletics director or the custodian, sorry, would have to go up on a ladder and get the ball out of the basket. And then they were like, well, let's just cut a hole in the basket. And the sport or the custodian is saying, but I need to use these baskets. Like they actually use them to collect peaches. So they just cut a small hole so they could stick a broom up and
Ah,
pop the ball out of the
okay.
basket.
That was a
Yeah.
good workaround.
Now, although these official rules are published on January 15th, 1892, in 2010, a handwritten version, an original copy of these rules are going to be sold. Any clue on how much they brought in?
Probably more than the price of a peach basket.
More than a price of a peach basket. Yep, absolutely. About half the cost of King Edward the VIII's home, $4.3 million. And it is a sports memorabilia record.
That's a very significant piece of history that somebody can
Yeah,
have. When you think
that's a
about it,
lot of cheddar.
that is a lot of cheddar. Basketball, there originally was not a shot clock,
Right. Yeah. No.
and so time became a fed the game along, and the games became more interesting for a lot of people. But sometimes you run out of time, and we are almost out of time on this week's show. But we would not be doing our public service if we did not inform you of a potential issue, because since this is the time machine, we sometimes can go forward in time,
Right. Not always, but sometimes.
but every now and then we're going forward, because on January 19th in 2038, we're going to have the Y2K38 problem.
I do not even like the sounds of that.
Yeah, this gonna be a mess.
What is
And
this problem,
I,
Mike?
the good news is it does not happen at the stroke of midnight.
That's good. So it's not like a whole new year, new you situation.
Exactly, it's going to happen at the exact same second all around the world.
Oh, okay. So we're all screwed at the same time.
Exactly.
Okay.
So at 3 hours, 14 minutes, and 7 seconds UTC time on January 19th, which I will convert for you because I learned about time zones on last week's episode, available in the archives. That would be 10:14 p.m. at night Eastern time on January 18th. So for you, Trish, it would be 8:14 p.m. on January 18th. So go ahead and put that in your phone. Of
Hmm.
course, maybe set it for like a minute before because the problem's really going to happen then. So you want a little heads up that it's going to be a thing. So the reason is because these computer programs are embedded, and with the way that they calculate the dates, they run out of binary lines. Okay, so that binaries, ones and zeros, and what happens is once you get to this moment in time, these clocks will now recognize it as a different date, and because it's trying to repeat the date again.
This sounds like a big old mess.
So there is some good news. Okay, so many of these systems that may be affected, such as anti-lock braking systems in cars, flights, traction controls, a lot of this stuff that uses internal guidance systems and GPS, it's going to affect them, but since they're not reliant on actual time, it probably isn't going to cause any damage.
That is good.
However,
Oh no.
communication devices such as cell phones, routers, wireless access points, etc., they do rely on storing an accurate time and date.
So
So,
everything with modern communication.
correct.
Oh my.
A lot of systems are updated, computers, cell phones, you're getting updates all the time on these things, so it's likely that they will figure something out. But in theory, some of these devices could potentially still be in use 18 years from now, and in which case some of them may have a problem.
Man, we started this episode talking about the importance of communication, and
Yes.
now we're ending this episode with the importance of communication. But luckily, like you said, we have quite a bit of time to find a solution.
That we do, but we do have is no more time for this week's episode. We thank you for joining us once again on Time Machine with Trish and Mike. We hope you have a great week. Do be better, people. Just be good to each other out there.
Hmm. Yeah, have a wonderful week, and we'll see you all back here on the Time Machine.